Well, okay, everyone, it's time to start. Hello and welcome to the second webinar of 2018 Investor and Corporate Partner Readiness webinar series from the Northeast Clean Energy Council and Navigate, a NECEC Innovation Program. My name is Catarina Madeira. I'm the director of Navigate, and I'm here today with an outstanding panel of experts to talk about the impact of patient capital and the power of venture capital. For those who are new to our webinar series, this series is part of NECEC's and the Navigate mission to support clean tech entrepreneurs and ecosystem stakeholders, such as incubators and accelerators that are located across the Northeast, by providing them not only with learning opportunities and access to experts, but as well with connections to investors, corporates, and customers to help them start, grow, and scale their businesses. We started this series a couple of months ago, talking about public sources of funding to clean tech startups. And during the coming webinars, we'll discuss other aspects related to investment and to strategic partnerships as well. So please stay tuned, as we'll be releasing soon more information about the next sessions. This webinar series, and in fact our programs at NECEC like Navigate, have the invaluable support of the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, with whom we work very closely to design and provide tailored programs like this series, and from National Grid as well. Our ultimate goal at NECEC is to drive innovation and accelerate the clean energy sector in the Northeast, and it is an honor to have these three entities as partners. So thank you very much to all of you. We are very pleased today to have with us representatives from 4 organizations. 3 of them invest in the clean tech space, and 1 is a startup that will be providing us a great case study. So we'll hear from Joanna Wolfson from Prime Impact Fund, John Santoleri from CVG and NYSERDA, that will be moderating the conversation today, John Ma from Braemar Energy Ventures, and Derek Lim Su from Peak Power. So each guest will make a very brief presentation followed by a discussion. And as always, if you want to be part of the conversation, as we'd love to, please feel free to use the Q&A feature to send us your questions. But before passing the word to John, I'd like to kindly remind you to stay on mute to avoid any sound problem, and to ask you as well to complete the short survey we'll send you at the end of the webinar. Your feedback is very important, not only to us to improve future sessions, but to our funders and partners as well. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to hand the webinar over to John Santoleri, a member of the Clean Energy Venture Group in New York and the NYSERDA's Innovation Advisor. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Katerina. I am actually going to hand this off more or less immediately, but wanted to underline something you just said, Katerina, which is we really want to make this an interactive presentation. And so I would, very much welcome anybody listening out there in the audience. Please use the question and answer feature there in Zoom and submit questions, and I will do my best to get them passed off to the panel here and answered. So as Katerina said, we're going to do a short intro from each of the folks here, and Joanna Wolfson from Prime is going to lead off. So over to you, Joanna.
Thank you, John. Thanks to both Katerina and John and NECEC for hosting us today. I'm here to talk about Prime Coalition and specifically the Prime Impact Fund, which is a new approach to investing using philanthropic capital, and I'll explain what that means. Katerina, could we cue up the slides?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Great. Go to the next slide. Yep, that's perfect. So the beautiful background that I had on this slide is apparently not showing up, but it's a picture of a cargo ship, meant to connote that while we can do a lot in terms of our goals for deep decarbonization with software and data analytics and other digitization methods, it can't do everything. Things like reducing carbon-intensive manufacturing and shipping and things like this, we can only get so far with software and data analytics. And yet, so while some of the most transformative opportunities lie in what we would call deep hardware-based, science-based innovations, what we have learned as an industry, as a community over the last 10 years or so, is that traditional venture investment is not in general optimized to support very early stage hardware-based companies. There are for sure exceptions to this. It is not a hard and fast rule, but it is in general the case that it's very challenging, for good reason, it's very challenging for traditional venture investment to come in at the earliest stages for companies that are deep hardware-based companies that need capital to get to a next place. So at Prime, as a mission-driven nonprofit organization, this is the problem we're motivated to solve. And if you can advance to the next slide, the specific tool that we're bringing to solve this challenge of the earliest stage financing gap for companies is risk-tolerant capital in the form of capital from foundations and individuals and donors. And in our view, if you can go back to the prior slide, in our view, this sits right between R&D funding from, say, government sources, whether they are federal or state or otherwise, and where venture capital is, in general, most comfortable playing after some initial risk has been retired. Now, this point about risk-tolerant capital is a really actually deep one that I continue to learn about and appreciate in my role here at Prime, where the capital that we're talking about deploying as first money into companies is capital that is what's called charitable, meaning it is tax exempt from the IRS perspective, and there is no expectation of return. In general, a return would be fantastic, but there is no explicit need for an expectation of return. This is a very unique kind of money. And it needs to serve a social purpose first and foremost. And in our case, in the world we think about, in the problem area we think about, that social purpose is mitigation of climate change. And so companies that are after solutions to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions are a good fit for this type of capital. And they're a good fit for this type of capital if traditional venture capital is not yet ready to support them. So that's our big idea in terms of where we think we can deploy a new type of capital and tool into this funding gap in order to better bridge companies to venture investing. If you can go to the next slide, what you'll see here is an overview of what I call, this is my foundation primer. So if I'm talking about philanthropic capital, that's great, but how much capital are we talking about? Well, if you look at foundations, about $600 billion sits in US foundations alone. A lot of that is what's called the endowment. So it's funding that gets invested for market rates of returns in order to keep the capital pool growing over time. 50 billion every year is distributed as grants, primarily as grants. So this is funding that's given away with no expectation of return. And that means two things. One is that it's impact first. And the second is that it's infinitely patient. So that one of the topics of this webinar is patient capital. I'll talk a little bit more about what that can mean. This capital is extra special because it's infinitely patient. In other words, there's no explicit expectation of return. You may have heard people talk about foundation money or philanthropic funding, and we're often not super precise, I think, as a community about what that means. So that's what the chart at the bottom of this slide is about, is showing you what how the financing works in general in a foundation, as an example. It's divided into, not to scale, 95% is what's called the endowment or the corpus, And these are funds that are being invested primarily for market rate returns, and the goal is to grow the pie over time. And then the purple side to the left is the charitable side, meaning funding that's provided as grants or no expectation of return. What we're trying to do at Prime is actually unlock that 5% side, because even though it is very small compared to the 95% side, it can do something that no other type of capital can do. And it's not that small. It's $50 billion a year. So if we were to unlock even just 0.1%, that would be hundreds of millions of dollars, which is more into early stage companies, which is more than venture capital is putting in as seed and Series A right now. On the right hand of the chart is in the gray is the endowment side, which, as I said, is mostly for market rate of return. This is most of what we're talking about when you hear people talk about impact investing or even patient capital. It's funding on that side of the spectrum that is seeking a return, but it can be more patient in how long it requires for the return. So I'm happy to answer more questions about that, but wanted to give it as a first primer. Katerina, if we could go to the next slide. As I said, Prime is focused on that 5% and channeling that capital into early stage companies. So Prime has now been doing this since 2015, existing as an intermediary between philanthropists on the one side, whether they are from foundations or donor advised funds or others, and channeling that capital into breakthrough startup companies. Next slide. We're interested in any startup companies that touch on greenhouse gas emissions in a big way. So we don't have any specific sector or vertical focus or preference even. We're interested in anything really across energy, waste, water, and ag, as long as it touches in a big way on greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So water, as an example, is of interest, especially in desalination applications, which are a huge energy hog. More so than at this point, water filtration for other purposes. So everyone has a different definition of clean tech. And one piece of advice is to, when you're talking to an investor, make sure that your definition is matching up with what their thesis area is, because in our case, we're focused on greenhouse gas emissions, which has partial but not total overlap with the broad category of clean tech. Katerina, if you can go to the next slide. Briefly, these are our core evaluation criteria. I'm going to go over these very quickly, but happy to answer questions about them. First is we're looking for really, really, really big climate impact. So this keeps us focused on big things rather than small things. We actually look to invest in companies that have a pathway to gigaton scale greenhouse gas emissions reduction if they are massively successful and deployed at scale. And we do our own internal modeling to determine the potential of a company to do that. We also, because we're looking to deploy charitable capital, we optimize for what we call additionality. So looking for opportunities that are unlikely to be invested in by traditional capital right now, or unlikely to be sufficiently financed by traditional capital right now. So we can co-invest with other investors, and we have, but we want to make sure that the company is unlikely to be able to raise outside capital without us, because we don't want to be crowding out any commercial capital. Lastly, we also don't want to be a bridge to nowhere. So we're also looking for companies that are going to be attractive to follow-on investors, like Clean Energy Venture Fund or like Braemar or others, in order to take these companies to scale. So we want to identify opportunities where we can philanthropically de-risk something and then hand it off to longer term partners who can take a company further down the way. Next slide, very high level case study of where we've done this is a company called QuidNet, which came to Prime early on in 2014 with a concept for pumped hydro underground, and had done all the geological modeling to show that theoretically this is possible, but hadn't done any field demonstrations and hadn't yet gotten funding or was getting turned away from everyone on Sand Hill Road because they hadn't yet demonstrated that this could work. And understandably, the venture investors wanted to see that it could work. So Prime went in and provided initial philanthropic funding over 3 rounds. The first round was all philanthropic funding, and then the second seed round was co-funded with an angel group, CEVG, representative of which we're going to hear from shortly. And then the third round also had strategic involvement from Halliburton. And then this was all en route to the company's Series A. So over from 2015 to 2017, they did field demonstrations. They hired a new CEO who was well positioned to carry the company to the next stage. And the company actually just closed their Series A round, co-led by Braemar Energy Ventures, which is the Bill Gates and Friends very large $1 billion fund, and Evoke Innovations, which is a strategic-backed Canadian firm. And so this is a great example of what we're trying to do with Prime and what we think is possible many times over. So the next couple slides I'll skip over, but they give you some examples of companies that we've already invested in. You can also see these on our website, so I'm not going to go over them now. And then just wanted to close on the next slide by saying, you know, we're open to ideas and want to see what you're working on. We have a place on our website where you can submit an overview of your company, and we will absolutely consider it for Prime. So happy to answer your questions after this, but for now I'll hand it off. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joanna. So it is rare that you see a completely new model in the investment business, and I feel like you guys have really done that. So it's exciting. And as Joanna said, Prime and CEVG, the group that I'm here representing, have co-invested together. And I just want to spend a minute or two describing Clean Energy Ventures and its components, while we perhaps aren't as unique as the Prime group. I think in some ways, Clean Energy Ventures is a unique animal. Could you go to the next slide, Katerina? In summary, focused exclusively on early stage clean energy investing, we define that as businesses which have the potential to significantly mitigate climate change. At the same time, we're looking for attractive financial returns. The group is focused on the northeastern U.S. with the core of its operation based in Boston, where it was founded. And we recently expanded into New York State, and I've helped co-found a group that we are growing in New York State of angels to expand the footprint, both in capital and experience, which is what we feel we bring to the table. We're close to 30 experienced entrepreneurs and operators and financiers who are actively engaged in screening and selecting and then mentoring and investing in companies. I think one of the unique things about CEVG is the recent addition of the Clean Energy Venture Fund, which is a $100 million committed capital fund that sits side by side with the angel group. And what that allows us to do is, in some ways, combine perhaps the best of venture and angel investing, the hands-on mentoring approach that best angel groups provide, combined with significant capital resources and committed capital resources that allow the fund to invest for longer through a Series B and potentially later. Could you go to the next slide, Katerina? One more. I'll just touch on a couple of statistics here. The group was founded over a decade ago. Some very significant and impressive statistics in terms of things like tons of carbon avoided and co-investors. The numbers in terms of members and dollars are somewhat out of date. That 17 million is actually in the mid-20s now, and that 100 rounds is up to well into the hundreds. And as I said, we're closing in on about 30 active members in the group. So you can next slide, please. These are an example of portfolio companies, and CEVG.com. You can find them all there. So I'll skip to the next slide and make two comments here. The strategies that we pursue are sort of outlined there in the middle. And the thing I want to emphasize is that mentoring is really critical to the approach. And so, we view ourselves as much more than dollars. And in fact, the way we attack the problem that Joanna described in terms of investments which aren't ready for traditional VC capital is often to get involved before investing as mentors. And that's something that we've done numerous times, and it gives us a seat at the table, helps us get to know and grow with the entrepreneur, and then ultimately puts us in a position to make a smart investment. So next slide, Katerina. Actually, I'm going to go down one more slide and talk about the criteria. So, we tend to review, like everybody, tons and tons of deals per year. Our goals are to find talented teams and great business opportunities in areas which have carbon mitigation impact. And I think the toughest thing, and really the subject of this conversation today, is around how do you find somebody who is right for you as an entrepreneur? And like I said, a key part of our diligence is looking, at what the market will bear for the products that entrepreneurs are trying to sell. And I think that is sometimes the toughest thing in clean tech, because figuring out how long and how much it will cost to actually scale, and then what a pricing strategy might look like in a market is among the biggest challenge. And that's where we spend lots and lots of our time. I'm going to put you to the last slide there, Katerina, 2 more. So I'll close one more slide. So I'll close with saying info@cevg.com, or CEVF for the fund particularly. CEVG.com has all the information about how to apply, and I will leave it there. And Katerina, remind me. So next up, we have Braemar Energy Ventures, and Jung, take it away. Do we actually have Jung here?
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Okay. So I heard an echo. Are you guys okay?
We're getting that echo. Maybe you could just turn off your computer volume.
Should I hang up on the phone? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Joanna and John, for the great introduction. I guess the focus here is really on patient capital. For Braemar, it's sort of maybe I can go over sort of who's Braemar before we can talk about how we all can work together to support entrepreneur here. So Braemar Energy Ventures, we're based in New York City, and the fund has been, maybe come to the next slide. We're based in New York, and the fund has been around for 15 years. And John, can you come to the next slide? Thank you. And so just very quickly, given we have limited amount of time here, very quickly talk about who's Braemar. So we are a 15-year-old firm. We manage over $600 million, sort of really traditional venture capital kind of structure. And we invest, I would say, we're a multi-stage investor. So we do early to later stage. If you look at our currently our breakdown, if you look at our portfolio, we invest a lot of companies in product development stage and or product introduction stage. So that's sort of so typically we not interested in taking the risk on science, and we are taking risk in engineering in the market. Those are risks that we're comfortable to take. And our investment today is primarily in the US, in the East Coast, not in the West Coast and East Coast, and some in Canada, and also we've done partially in Europe as well. And we are primarily looking at 4 areas to invest. That's the third bucket here. Power and utility, for innovations in those areas. Industrial processing and manufacturing space. This is really focused on digital theme of the, reinvent the whole industrial sector. And we put a lot of effort recently in mobility and transportation. And we also have partially invested in consumer tech for the really more kind of relevant consumer engagement tools to help to scale business, in mobility, in power, in manufacturing area. So that's sort of the kind of in a nutshell of Braemar. Just next slide, please. And I kind of, quite summarize, like, entrepreneurs might ask me, like, what are you looking for when you invest in companies? It's really, based on our sort of experience in the last 15, 20 years, my personal experience. I think team, definitely a CEO, strong leadership team, kind of, that's very, very important. The different stage of the company, might require the CEO, but the leadership quality is what we're looking for. So it's very important. And maybe coming back and emphasis on team again. Our team has relevant experience in the sector. It's definitely a big plus. This is definitely very debatable. And some people, not sure intellectual property is important or not. In our case, we think the IP is quite important. A lot of companies, we invest in a sort of processing or hardware space. I think having a very strong defensible IP is very important. And same thing here. So we did in the past we did a lot of spin-offs from University of Healthcare. One of the important factor we're looking for is we call it the brain or the heart is really spinning into the company. Because otherwise, if it's just licensed IP or licensing technology, you don't have the real inventors on the team. So that's really hard to keep innovating. So that's really important. And of course, part of the equation here to be successful is to execute, right? So if you look at a lot of impact space in the past 10 years, there's a lot of success, but a lot of failure as well. So we look at so looking back, what is the important factor to contribute to success of execution? To really be able to focus.
Young, we're having a little difficulty hearing you. I don't know if you can just get a little closer to the mic. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Maybe one more important factor is about having the right capital structure financially to be able to scale. So this comes back to, you have Prime, you have CDG, and you have Braemar. So at different stage, we have we're looking for different stage to match this investment. But overall, you want to make sure that the company is set up correctly to be able to attract additional reinvestors. At the same time, be able to incentivize the entrepreneurs and the existing investors. So that structure, we think is very important to get it right initially. And also, looking at there's different way to kind of scale business. You have equity like that, all different ways, and we really think that's important to understand the landscape of financing to be able to kind of in the most efficient way to scale a company. So in a nutshell, we have invested a lot of companies that didn't put on the website. Once we really see a very strong trend here is to co-invest with corporate strategic. We looked at our own portfolio. We have 85% companies have co-invested from the corporate strategic side, and they really, we see a lot of values and adding value early on in the company's formation stage, and they really bring a bigger wide network to help companies scale. And so it's a really win-win situation. We see that. So that's, I think, it's important to bring up. Thank you. That's my presentation.
Thanks very much, Zheng. So next, we're going to hear from Derek Su from Peak Power, and Derek represents the and entrepreneur side of the picture here. So Derek, over to you.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'll give you guys a brief overview of Peak, and then kind of walk you through, and I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are curious to see the experience of a 3.5-year-old startup in terms of how we raise capital and kind of how we view different types of capital, patient, strategic, and so on and so forth. So John, can we go to the next slide, please? So Peak is essentially a software provider. Our software is predictive analytics using machine learning and advanced statistics to predict when the most expensive hours of peak demand occur for both building owners and utilities. We're still a small company, about 20 people with offices mainly in Toronto, where we're headquartered, but an office in New York and in Boston as well. Our whole business is built off of this software, where we've built 3 major pillars of core competencies: people that understand energy, buildings, and software. And we believe that those 3 core competencies are required in order to ensure that you are able to deliver a scalable, adaptable platform that'll be, useful for your clients in the years to come. Throughout the 3.5 years, I got to say, as being the founder of the company, raising capital is very difficult. A lot of times you see a vision in terms of where you see the market going, but the venture group or even the family offices or the grants have not come around yet. And a lot of times that's the case. Timing is definitely one of the biggest issues when you're raising capital. We're lucky to have our largest investor be the investment office of David Thompson. David Thompson is part of the Thompson family, a $40 billion family in Canada, the richest family in Canada. He's also the chairman of Thomson Reuters, the Thompson in front of Thomson Reuters, and owners of the Atlanta Thrashers and a bunch of other endeavors. And also we were able to raise capital from the provincial fund, VC fund, Mars IF, which is governed by the largest clean tech VCs in Canada. In addition, we also raised some money from friends and family. So in a nutshell, we've been successful raising to date. We've got sufficient capital for the foreseeable future, but I'll kind of explain you the story in terms of how we were able to get to that point, right? So if we go to the next slide, please. So one of the biggest pieces that we faced when we raised capital was that the idea is always a lot clearer in your mind than it is when you explain it to someone who is more likely a generalist in the clean tech space. Typically VCs have people that see, we just heard from different people, have seen several different business models, so they can't be 10,000 miles in your business idea, although you may expect them to be. And one of the issues we faced with capital was to be able to simply explain the problem that we were solving. And really, if you can find a picture that does that, a picture speaks 1,000 words is the saying. Our analogy is that just states, provinces, countries all have to build a 16-lane highway that is only being utilized a couple days a year, right? And this 16-lane highway not only needs to be built, but it also needs to be maintained. And the biggest difference between traffic jams and blackouts is that traffic jams are not liked, but acceptable, and blackouts are not. So how that relates to our business is that in order for jurisdictions to manage their day-to-day operations, on the hottest and coldest days of the year, when you guys turn on your AC or your heating, someone needs to have generation capacity to be able to produce that power for you. And you need to have the poles and wires to be able to deliver that power. So as a result, your electricity bills and the way that you're charged are structured in that fashion to recoup back the cost of this 16-lane highway. So the next slide, please, John. So it just presses this little animation just 3 times. So as a result, in markets like NYISO, New York, New England NYISO, and Ontario, 8 hours of peak demand can represent 70% of your bill, right? So what happens if you could actually forecast, what those 8 hours of peak demand were? Then all of a sudden you would have a pretty, compelling value proposition. Next slide, please. So what Peak has done is we basically developed our own software that sits on top of a fully integrated energy storage system, right? It can be used for a lot of other things besides energy storage. We chose energy storage to start the business off with, and it's broadened since then due to its non-invasive solution. Many companies are looking at the built environment and trying to do things like automate VFDs, real-time commissioning of stuff. We've got some pretty large partners in the mix that represent, a significant square footage of real estate space, where the word non-invasive became a big concept that we all needed to get our heads around. The idea of not disturbing tenant comfort became an issue. So Peak basically designed our own software to sit on top a Tesla power pack, a Lockheed battery, and we're basically the autopilot for the car. And if we go to the next slide, we take into consideration, there's a couple more animations there. Sorry, I should have just given you, there's 3 more. We've developed a software that can not only optimize the operations of individual sites, but then aggregate them into virtual power plant. And using predictive analytics, using both structured and unstructured data, and different versions of machine learning and AI, be able to predict and be able to forecast and predict when the most expensive hours of peak demand are, and then prioritize what the operations of that battery would be in order to make sure that you're getting the biggest return on your asset with the least amount of wear. And if you're able to do that, which we have been able to do, then you can empower building owners to go from being consumers of power to become prosumers of power. And all of a sudden they can manage better their buying and selling and storage of electricity. And you can also help service utilities. So that 16-lane highway still has to be replaced. And if there's ways to defer infrastructure investments, help them increase renewables penetration, improve the overall power quality of the grid, then they'll pay you for those services. And this is really what our whole business has been based off of. So as you can imagine, in just a short 2-3 minutes, me explaining this concept is a lot for someone to take in. So as a result, simplifying the message was really key in order to be successful to raise capital as we have been. Next slide, please. So this is the one I'm hopeful, like there's entrepreneurs on the phone that will probably be the most useful to you. And I really caution everybody to say that this is really Peak's perspective. And I really do believe that everyone has a different view. And I do believe timing is really what it all comes down to, right? So I've identified 5 types of funding that is available. And there's plenty, I'm just learning there's other types just on this phone call today, right? Where each, I believe, type of funding has a role in the life cycle of your business. Right? Depending on how big your business cone is and depending how mature your product is or how much capital you need to get to a proof of concept, you may find that you're able to accelerate more towards the right side faster than in other cases. And I think it's been clear from like Prime's first presentation that a lot of hardware businesses that are trying to move the needle in greenhouse gas stuff take significant amount of capital before a VC is willing to touch it, right? Or at least need some sort of padding to be able to get other capital to unlock that proof of concept, right? So our business started off with friends and family. We basically raised a bunch of money on friends and family. The founders put their own money in. And essentially, friends and family are extremely patient, right? Their whole thing is all about being flexible. They most of them don't even know what you're doing. And it's a great way to be able to get capital to develop that proof of concept if you can, and develop some market traction, right? In the end, they invest blindly. They're investing in you. They're investing in your business idea. They're investing out of pity. There's a lot of things that happen there, but it's a great way to start your business, right? Then it led us to people that consider themselves angels, right? And I think angels really, really vary. From my experience, I've never met an angel that was an actual angel. A lot of times the angel organizations that I met with tended to be people that were just thought they were VCs and were very aggressive in terms of their valuation with very little understanding of the actual businesses themselves. So we kind of had no traction with angel groups, right? We tried a couple, they charge you fees to kind of present. It looked like someone was just trying to create their own business to manage as opposed to actually deploy capital that made sense. We moved next to grants. So with the friends and family money that we were able to secure a proof of concept, we immediately put ourselves in the crosshair of two emerging cones of opportunity: energy storage and artificial intelligence. And that put us in a great spot where we're able to develop non-dilutive capital to the business, to then scale up the business, to be able to add more market traction, to add more proof of concepts, and really scale up the team to get to the next level. And from that point on, that would allowed us to get the attention of some VCs and some family offices. And we were able to then raise money with Osmington, which is David Thompson's investment office, which really we found a large difference between family offices and venture capital firms. And it really varies from different VC firms that we've dealt with. But from our experience, the family offices had a much more long-term view. We're much more patient in terms of that scenario. We're much more patient. We're much more flexible in terms of how they're willing to invest. And they really invested in the team. Maybe too blindly, but they invested in the team, meaning that they knew that there was a cone of opportunity there, and if they believed in the management would figure out how to monetize that in that marketplace. So we had obviously an extremely positive experience with them. They've invested us on two separate occasions already, and that kind of leads us into the next world, which is venture capital, where in theory everybody goes to VCs because they see Silicon Valley on Netflix, and they all want to go there and raise capital there. From our experience, what we found was amazing contacts, super knowledgeable in the space, happy to give you free advice. It all comes down to timing. A lot of them have already made bets in our space prior to us coming into the market. And once someone's made a bet, it's very difficult for them to go back on that hypothesis and then invest in someone that's similar to a company they've already invested into. So a lot of them made bets on the hardware side in energy storage and didn't believe it was the software. And a lot of them lost money in that venture, right? A lot of them invested in software, but they invested very early. And then they believed that would get commoditized. So to me, the VC piece is all about timing, right? If you catch a VC that's just starting to create their hypothesis of what they're doing and they have capital on hand and they like the management team, then perhaps that can all make sense. From our perspective, we followed a lot of California companies that already had initial traction. Some of those California companies went bankrupt, and there was a little bit of sour, milk taste in people's mouths on the VC side. But now where we are today, that's turned around, completely. But that required us to have significant market traction, more proof of concepts in the marketplace, more other investors looking at us. So that's kind of a nutshell of our perspective. So, we're fully funded today for the next, foreseeable future, about 20 people. And the number one takeaway I give to any entrepreneur on the phone is, timing is something you don't control. And that's where the luck comes into play. You can be as proactive as you can, but it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. Sometimes the timing is good for them, but not good for you because you don't have enough stuff that's done. Sometimes you have a lot of stuff that's done, but it's not good for them. And you just can't take it personally. Everyone's got their own things that are going on, and everyone's got their own investment thesis. So hopefully that's helpful for everybody, and happy to address any questions.
Derek, that's terrific. I think you really touched on, especially in that last slide there, a lot of the issues that entrepreneurs have to consider as they're looking at these various funding sources. So let me start with a question for the panel. And we've got a bunch of questions from the audience, and please keep those questions coming. But the first question I'll ask the panelists, and maybe Derek, you're on a roll, you can perhaps address this one as well. What are the key questions that an entrepreneur should ask of their funding source? Derek, what was your experience going through that process?
Well, I think a lot of times it's about one, at the beginning, you definitely need to understand their investment criteria. I think Braemar did a good job, and others on the phone call did a good job at describing their investment thesis. I mean, you have to be able to make sure that your business is in the crosshairs of what they invest into, right? I think it's foolish to change your business to try to make your business look like what they invest to, as opposed to just finding a source that meets your actual, that actually fits your actual business model. And then I think it's really important to make sure you understand how they invest and what their investment thesis is, meaning, do they want control? Do they not want control? Do they want management control? And make sure that aligns with what you want to do with your business. And I think a lot of times people chase the money because they think that money is going to solve a lot of problems, as opposed to picking the right fit for investor. And I think I've been through it for 3.5 years. You think money is going to solve stuff, but in actuality, you don't need a lot of money to actually do certain things. Signing deals up to create traction has nothing to do with really money. That's just about salesmanship. So sometimes you don't fit the criteria that they have, and perhaps you need to just better understand, especially for the next fundraising, about where you need to be. And sometimes it's that fit that doesn't really make sense. So understanding that fit at the beginning, I believe, is the most crucial to make sure you're not wasting their time and they're not wasting yours.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I agree. I think communication is an important thing, and understanding. And a lot of the stories that I hear about impatient capital, or situations where companies didn't get the capital that they expected, in some ways can be boiled back to misunderstandings in communication. And as somebody who has been on both sides of the table, I spent 15 years as a venture capitalist at a large firm, and then I'm now doing angel investing with an organized group. I think what you said about the fact that this was your experience, and there's not one size that fits all. I think there are patient VCs out there, and there are impatient VCs, and the same would go for any of the other categories of investors. So let me move to a couple of the other audience questions that are coming in. And Joanna, there's a couple of questions that I'll consolidate for you, but one is around the greenhouse gas emissions and the modeling methods used specifically in the waste sector, and then a comment about the 1 gigaton target, and that somebody just asked, that sounds like a large target. So just give me your views on those two things.
Yeah, and John, if it's okay, I want to quickly address the prior question too. I totally echo the comments that were made. I would just underscore the importance of making sure that any investors you're considering share your vision for the company. That has big implications and small implications, but they all matter. I mean, from the types of people you want to bring into the company, so hires that you're going to make, and especially the kind of exit that you're envisioning for the company, you want to make sure that you're considering bringing an investor into the fold that is totally aligned with you. If you're bringing in an investor that has a different expectation for the type of exit for your company, that's going to cause a lot of problems down the road. So that's just getting people who really buy into your version of the company vision is probably the most important thing that I would say is to keep top of mind. On Prime, there was the greenhouse gas emissions question, and what was the one prior to that, John?
So there's a specific question comment around the 1 gigaton target, and then another question about modeling emissions, particularly in the waste sector.
Sure. So I thought there was something before that. So we have actually published our methodology for how we evaluate greenhouse gas emissions reduction. That's available on our website. So if you go to primecoalition.org and there's a publications tab, you can scroll down and find a report that actually we co-published with NYSERDA on this methodology, and that it walks through a couple of high-level examples, and one can take a look. And the core of it is really is common no matter what sector you're looking at. It's basically we look to make assumptions, and you can't do this without making assumptions, and it's ripe with uncertainty. We know that, but starting with making assumptions about where the industry is heading anyway, and then what additive value technology could have on top of an industry that has some projected trends with or without that technology. And then making sure to account for things like embodied energy or embodied emissions of a process or a material that's involved in going into the technology. You can see in the report some examples of how we have implemented this methodology. The 1 gigaton target is notionally per year if massively successful and deployed at scale. So we know that that's a huge target. The reason we have it as such a large target is because if we zoom way out and look at our goals for carbon emissions, we know that there's 70 gigatons per year that need to be reduced by 2050 or thereabouts. And so we want to make sure that we're very focused on transformative greenhouse gas emissions reductions rather than incremental ones, which is why we have such a large goal in mind. And when we are modeling the impact, we want to see that there is some pathway to gigaton scale impact. We certainly consider companies that have where it's harder to see a pathway toward that, and are happy to consider kind of what we call bank shots to that level of outcome, such as an enabling technology that deployment of that technology itself may not yield that much reduced emissions, but could actually move an industry toward towards emissions reduction at that scale. So take a look at the report online. I think it'll give a bit of a better sense. And John, let me know if there's anything I didn't hit in the series of questions you posed.
No, thank you, Joanna. Very helpful. So let me take another question. And Zhang, this is for you, but obviously if others have comments, please weigh in. But there's a question around the line between science and risk and product development, especially in the hardware area. You know, maybe how that correlates to, say, a technology readiness level. So for Braemar, where do you tend to get invested?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I somehow here. So we are. It's a very very good question. Let me turn this up. Yeah, it's a very good question. So one, whereas I think as I said, when we look at the technology risk, we probably will bring expert kind of assess, whether this is sort of still in a laboratory phase, kind of proving out the mechanism, or it's really about execution, right? I think we are investing when the model is proven, technology sort of works, and then we would invest money to help scale, build the product. I think that's sort of it's tricky because different technology, different sort of proven point, right? For example, in the battery space, if you can successfully make one battery cell more efficient, not necessarily means you can have a overall more efficient battery system. So that's a very complex chemistry question. So probably not a great venue to answer, but so that's sort of what I'm trying to say is we typically get involved when we see the technology is proven. Yeah, that's sort of the situation.
Yeah, having a little bit difficulty hearing you there, especially that last comment. You said you typically get involved, and then it really was not audible. Could you just repeat what you said? I'm going to move to another question. It just sounds like we're having some technical difficulties there with Braemar's connection. But let's see. So we've got a question around developing countries and commercialization pilots. And this is from a startup who's invested in expanding to those markets. What are the... So the question is, what are the best pathways to expand to developing countries? Joanna, has Prime invested in companies which are commercializing products abroad?
Yes,
developing
absolutely.
Countries.
So Prime only invests in US-based companies, but a main target of many of our companies is deployment abroad. So several of our companies, including QuidNet, Wright Electric, Lilac, and others, are targeting early deployments abroad, and helping them do that effectively and smartly is a big part of our mentorship and involvement with those companies. It's definitely a big market opportunity. So it's something that we would want to encourage companies to do when that's the right move for their business.
Terrific. I mean, my commentary as CEVG is that, like Prime, we're only investing in U.S.-based companies and with a focus on the Northeast. However, there are some folks, within the group that have, expertise in commercializing products in some of those markets, and so, certainly we're willing to do that. I think it can be a challenge, and so having management who understands those risks is critical. So let me ask a question of Derek. Derek, and this is around aligning interests. I mean, we talked a little bit about that theme, but coming back to something Joanna said, and making sure that there's a fit, with the vision. What deal structures, if any, have you guys employed to make sure that interests were aligned between yourselves and investors? And were there any, particular choice of either notes or preferred or straight equity that you felt had played an impact in trying to make sure that your incentives and the investors' incentives were aligned?
Yeah, I don't think you need to worry about making sure that your investor is going to make sure their interests are aligned. I think that there are typical negotiations around financial structures that protect them in the course of liquidation and in the course of other issues where they're able to recoup back their money at a faster rate than you are. I think that negotiations of dividends and other things that happen or interest rates that they accrue, I mean, it's very typical stuff, I think, that you would see. I think, it depends on, I would say it's typical, but it really depends on the sophistication of the entrepreneur. This is my first time being an entrepreneur, but I was quite savvy in financings, but not like this. So usually your first financing, you learn quite a bit in terms of, the closing docs and the closing book in terms of what happens over there. But I think it's very typical for your first couple of rounds of financing that they're always going to have preferred shares from that standpoint. And I think that until you get, especially you start with family office, until you get your large strategic that comes in, they'll kind of relook at your cap table and then reset everything back to where they believe it's going to be. So I think, for sure, you don't need to worry. They're always going to make sure that they're always going to be protected. And again, if you do a good job at aligning the interests of the company that doesn't want to take over your company, wants to be patient capital, wants to allow you to manage the business and allow you to control your board and control the day-to-day operations and limit the shareholders agreements, limit the actual veto rights that they do. You'll know through your negotiation whether you're aligned or not in terms of the day-to-day management. But so they trusted me and the business and my partners to basically manage the business and make the decisions, and really just held their veto rights to specific things that would impact them directly. But the day-to-day business is something that we're managing ourselves.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. So that goes back to the comment I made earlier, where understanding how things work, what's in the documents, and what your relationship is going to be like with an investor is critical, because if you don't work that out up front, it's a marriage, and so you need to be able to adapt when things inevitably go wrong. So we've come up on the hour time frame here, and I will comment, Katerina, you can wrap up here, but a number of people have asked about how do we apply to the various organizations, or are the slides going to be available? And so, Katerina, can you comment on availability? I believe we'll make them available to everyone, and the slides in there have contact information.
Yes, John, absolutely. So as soon as we have the recording ready to share with everyone, we'll set the recording together with the slides. And but in case anyone needs assistance in reaching out to someone, happy to help. So as John said, it's time to wrap up. Thank you so much to our panelists and to you as well that joined us today. I hope the session was valuable for everyone. So and we hope to see you all in the next webinar on September 12th. Thank you so much, and have a great day, everyone.